Hey friends, wanted to talk to you a little bit about Genesis 19 through 21. This is a very troubling section of scripture, how bad Sodom and Gomorrah got. And Sodom becomes almost this like iconic city that we hear all the way through the Bible, even into the book of Revelation, as kind of a archetype of corruption. And we remember that Abraham prayed and prayed in chapter 18 that God would spare the city if you could find only 10 righteous people, and you couldn't even find 10 righteous people. In addition, it seems like even Lot had pretty weak faith, although in 2 Peter we hear that Peter says that he was in anguish in that city, and yet when the angels tried to get Lot to leave out of Sodom before they were going to destroy this very corrupt and wicked city, they hesitated. Lot hesitated. He needed to be yanked out of the city. In addition, his wife turned back and looked back, and they were told not to, and she became a pillar of salt. And then we see the corruption continued as Lot's daughters, out of fear and lack of faith, they sleep with their father after getting him drunk, and that starts the two nations of the Moabites and the Ammonites, which we will hear about later on in the scriptures. All this being said, once again, we see that God's people, even the so-called best of God's people, are a mixed bag. Abraham shows a lack of faith, a lack of trust. Lot here shows a great lack of faith and trust, and just shows how important it is who you surround yourself with. Lot is surrounded by this corruption in this corrupt city, and he got comfortable with it. Then later on in the next chapter, in Genesis chapter 20, we hear Abraham and Abimelech, and this seems like a non-important part to add to the scriptures, that Abimelech and Abraham are fighting over a well. And I think the importance here is how important water was in that desert region, in that area. And so those were really important pieces of property. And yet this is almost like the first little slice of property that Abraham has. He doesn't have any land. He doesn't possess any property. He was moving around as a nomad, basically. And yet God had promised that one day Abraham's descendants would take over the whole land. And very much like the promise of a son, Abraham has to wait. He only gets this little spot of land. He has to bargain with Abimelech, get him to sign with an oath that he gets this little section, this little well, to take care of his family. And so very often that's what happens. We have these promises from God, and we only see a sliver of the fulfillment. Finally, the birth of Isaac, we hear about in chapter 21, and that's a fulfillment of a prophecy they have been waiting for literally decades, and they are way past years of childbearing, and yet God does a miracle. You would think with this miracle they would respond with gratefulness and hope, and in many ways they're very thankful and happy about the child. And yet when there's a squabble between Isaac and Ishmael, they send Ishmael away into the wilderness, basically. Hagar and Ishmael, they are forgotten and pushed aside, and another lack of faith, a lack of devotion to the people that they should be protecting. And yet God sees them. As we hear, he sees and he provides for them. And we're going to see this over and over again, that God is a God who loves, who provides, who sees his people, especially those who are in weak situations, and he provides for them. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully you can see how there is some application. Hopefully you see the mixed bag of your own life in these very iconic characters. God bless you. Keep reading. Don't give up.